Hey everyone, this is Johnny and welcome back. Today I'm going to be trying a new propagation method, and that is a process called air layering. Of course, in the past I've showed you how I've grown a number of Japanese maple trees from seedling all the way to 3-4-year-old tree, and I've shown you that process, how I pot those up, when I pot those up, when I fertilize them, etc. I've also shown you more recently some of the cuttings that I've been starting and trying to root cuttings, and I will give you an update later on in the video on how those are doing. The ones that I took in April of this year and the ones I took middle of June, pretty recently there. We'll give you an update on those. But today I want to try the process of air layering and see if I can get my air layers to root through some processes that I've been researching. So stick around and I'll dive into this process. First of all, before we move over to the tree, let's talk about the supplies that you need for air layering. The first thing you're going to need is some kind of rooting medium. For this particular example, I'm going to be using sphagnum moss. I'm definitely going to be exploring in the future some sphagnum moss alternatives because I know there are some issues with sustainability around sphagnum moss. But for this first time, this is actually me going through this process for the first time based on the research that I've done. I wanted to go with the proven method first, and then I'm going to explore some different alternatives like COCO, other things like that, maybe even just soil or soil and perlite, some mixes like that. But for now, for this time, I'm going to go ahead and use this sphagnum moss. You'll need some kind of soil or some kind of medium for it to root in. You also are going to need, from this process, you'll need a gallon Ziploc bag. For this particular one, I've left the top intact and the sides intact, but I have gone ahead and slit off the bottom. So it's going to be open on both ends of the bag, and I'll show you how I'm going to do that in a minute. Some people just use a flat piece of plastic. I think this process is going to work really well. I'll need aluminum foil to cover the bag to make sure that it stays moist and direct sunlight doesn't get on it. And then I'm going to be using basically this stuff here. It's got a wire in the middle. It's like the twist ties that they put on bread and stuff at the supermarket, but it's for the garden, for tying stuff down. I'm going to be using that to secure the air layer. You'll also need to make sure that you have some kind of pruners to prune the area around where you want to do the air layer, so that's important. As always, I always have some kind of alcohol wipes to sanitize the instruments before I actually do any kind of cuts into the tree. I'm going to be using some protective gloves for when I handle the hormone rooting powder, which I will also need here. And I got some hormone rooting powder that I've actually mixed with water to create a little bit more of a paste. And I got a toothbrush so I can apply that to the air layer. And then you'll also need a good knife. Now, I'm using some nice cut protection gloves. I think it's a good idea anytime you're doing handling of a sharp knife to use some kind of cut protection gloves, because you want to be really careful with this knife. So I got these cut protection gloves and this sharp knife. And with these tools here, I'm going to create this air layer. So now let's move over to the tree and I'll show you what I'm looking for, and I'll show you the branch that I've selected for this PIXIE Acer Palmatum. Okay, so as I mentioned, this is an Acer Palmatum variety called PIXIE. I recently showed you that I took some cuttings that I'm attempting to root from this tree, but this time I'm going to be doing an air layer. So what I'm looking for when I think about air layering a tree is several-fold. One, I don't want to air layer a branch that's going to, because we're going to remove that branch, obviously, once it roots, hopefully. We don't want to do that to a branch that we want to keep on the tree. That would really affect the shape of the tree. For this particular tree, this branch here goes and shoots out to the side. It looks fine on the tree, and I could keep it there, but it's actually going to be a good example for me to air layer. You'll notice here I have cut back a few of the little branches around to leave this good area here. And I'm probably going to air layer this somewhere below this node here. So I'll probably do the ring here in a minute. That'll show you that process, because that'll give you enough room to put the air layer bag around that I'll fill with our soil medium, with our rooting medium. Okay, so I've selected my branch here as I've showed you. I've decided to go ahead and do my cutting right here on this bark, right below this node here, I have my alcohol swab, and then I also have this knife. This is a grafting knife. This is the knife I'm going to be using. Once again, I have these nice cut protection gloves on to make sure I don't slice my finger. Don't want to do that. And I'm going to go ahead and sanitize these really nicely, this knife really nicely, to make sure I don't spread any kind of contaminants onto this tree. And then what I'm going to do here is I'm going to just cut real lightly here around this, just into, through that bark layer, through the cambium layer and all that, so I can get down to the wood. I'm going to expose the wood here in between this. So just carefully do that, making sure that you're not cutting too deep. Okay, then I'm going to come down. I've made that mark there. You can see that mark there. That's where that starts. Do that just to make sure I know. And then I'm going to come down and I'm going to do somewhere a little bit, maybe an inch, inch and a quarter down here. I'm going to do the same thing. But with that done now I want to come here and I just want to peel back that layer in between where I cut. And so I'm just going to peel back that bark. And the goal here is to get all the way down to the wood. If you get down to the wood, this is going to cause the tree to want to keep the top part of the branch alive. And so it's going to try to shoot out roots somewhere around here to keep this top part alive, because I'm basically cutting off the tree's source of water, nutrients, etc. And this process is going to hopefully force this tree to make roots there. Okay, so as you can see, there's a nice clean cut, a little bit over an inch. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply some of that hormone rooting power paste that I did. Once again, I mixed that, that hormone rooting powder with water to create a paste. I'm going to go ahead and apply that right here, because this is where this is actually going to root. And then I'll show you how we pack a bag around this and tie a bag around this. All right, anytime that I handle anything with rooting hormone, I like to wear these protective nitrile gloves just to keep the hormone from getting on my skin. I think that's an excellent idea. Once again, I've mixed that with water and I've created a little bit of a paste here. You can use a gel, a rooting gel would be also a great idea. And I would definitely maybe try that in the future, but I have a powder for now. And I'm just going to carefully take this and wipe this rooting hormone mixed with water. All right, so as you can see, we have a good layer of that rooting hormone on there. Now I'm going to grab a Ziploc bag and I'm going to go ahead and slip this over this and pack that with my sphagnum moss or whatever rooting soil medium that you're using. Okay, so I've slipped this bag all the way down to this end, and you can see here I'm getting close to the spot here. I also have some sphagnum moss that I have really wet here in this bag. I have it soaking in this Ziploc bag with a lot of water in it, so it needs to be nice and wet for this to happen. I'll pick the stuff here at the top that's not like sopping, but it's good solid wet. Get some of that in the bag here, and then start packing it around that spot. The roots are going to come out once again above where I did the cut around the branch. So I want to make sure that the areas above that are nice and covered, packed tightly. And I also need to leave enough here at the bottom so where I can tie that closed. Okay, now we got the top part. Once again, I'm making sure that's packed tightly around that spot. There, I think that's good and tight. That looks good right there. Okay, so I have that all covered and with the bag around it and with my medium here. Generally, this will probably take sometime around 8 weeks for this to root, so I'll check back on this with you guys in 8 weeks. But in between then, I am going to make sure that I check the moisture levels in this to make sure it stays moist and make sure that this can actually root into this medium. What's great about using a clear plastic is I should be able to see roots come through here, and I'll know it's ready at that point. Now, as I mentioned, I'm going to use this aluminum foil, and that's going to allow this not to get any sun on it and maintain as much moisture as possible. So I'm going to go ahead and wrap that foil around there, and just once again give it an extra opportunity to not lose moisture there. This process, once again, I'm going through it for the first time, and it's good to experiment. It's good to try these things for yourself. My wife and I watch a channel called Roots and Refuge. You might watch that channel on YouTube as well, but Jessica from Roots and Refuge, she talks about turning your waiting room into a classroom, and that's something I'm doing right now. I mentioned in one of my past videos that in the future I plan to actually have a nursery, and I plan to propagate and sell Japanese maples and some other plants like that. But right now I don't have the ability, and so what I'm doing is I'm learning some of these processes now and experimenting with different things, and learning now when the stakes are low, when I can have fun with it. Whereas in the future, when it's actually more of a business, then I'll have the experience and the knowledge. So I encourage you to try some of these methods that I'm trying, and turn your waiting room into a classroom, as Jessica says. I believe that's a great statement that I've taken to heart, and it's a good time to learn before the pressure is on to have to make money through a nursery. I believe if you're watching this, some of you might have that dream to have a nursery one day. But practice now. Enjoy what you do have. You may not have the greenhouse. I don't have a greenhouse. You may not have all these things to be able to propagate plants. But if you have a little bit of space and a little bit of time, you can practice now. Let's move over to the second variety, which is the Acer Palmatum ALPENWEISS. All right, here's an Acer Palmatum variety called ALPENWEISS, and I've shown you this in the past. This is a beautiful variegated tree. I've taken some cuttings from this. Last year I took a few cuttings from this and successfully rooted those. It looks like I possibly will get one from this year to root as well, but I wanted to try the air layering process on this tree like I did the PIXIE tree. Now what we're looking at here is I found this branch here. It's a good healthy branch. I have removed some of the other side branches, and I'm going to actually cut the ring that I showed you in the past video. I could do that here, but I think I'm going to go ahead and go through the process here because I like how thick this is here, and it'll still give me enough room here at the bottom to tie the bag around that. So I'm going to go ahead and do the ring like I did in the last video on this one, and then we'll pack this one, put on the rooting hormone, and go through that process once again. Okay, that looks pretty good. A little bit over an inch there, maybe an inch and a quarter once again. Taking it all the way down to the wood, remove the layers on the top, and once again the roots should come through this part of the tree if we successfully are able to air layer this. I'm going to get the Ziploc bag over the top, add the rooting hormone, and then pack that nice and tight and then tie it again. A lot of people recommend that when you air layer, you use a fungicide. So for this particular one, I did use an OMRI certified sulfur-based fungicide to go ahead and make sure that I don't get any fungal diseases in this air layer. This is a beautiful tree and I don't want that to get diseased. This should hold moisture pretty well, but I'm going to check on it. I don't know how often. I'll just probably right away I'll check quite often, and then I'll kind of gauge as it gets warmer how often I need to water that. But once again, this is going to take roughly about 8 weeks before I should start seeing roots form through into that medium. And at that point, then I'll show you the process of repotting this and growing those roots out, and then eventually that becoming a pretty good sized tree. So now let's move over to the cuttings that I took earlier this year, and let's talk about how those are doing. Okay, here's the spot under the Japanese maple bench that I've shown you in the past, and I have these two bends side by side. Every day, at least twice a day, I do make sure that I mist these and keep them nice and wet. I once again keep them out of direct sunlight, but I do want them to get some light, some overhead light, but no direct sunlight. You could probably also put this under a big tree and that would work. Let's check on how these are doing. We'll start first of all with the cuttings that I took on June 13th, and then I'll move over to the cuttings that I took on April 18th. Okay, here are the cuttings that I took roughly a week ago. As you can see, they're still looking great. I cut off a lot of the leaves at the top, as you can see, but the leaves that I have left still look nice and vibrant and healthy, and so this is looking like I want it to. The weather is warming up a little bit, which I'm thankful for, because the ones I started earlier in the year, I've lost a number of them because the weather was much cooler and these need warmth. And since I don't have a heated greenhouse, or I'm not growing these in a spot where I'm heating them, I'm a little bit reliant on what the weather does. But so far, these, after a week, roughly a week, June 13th is when I took these. It's now June 21st when I'm filming this. These are looking good. So here are the cuttings that I took on April 18th. So it's been over 2 months now, and I still have some that look viable. We have the orangiolas. We have 1 there, 2, 3, 4 orangiolas that still look viable and good. This one has some good new growth down here. This one has some new growth there, as I showed you in a past video. Those are looking pretty good. You can see that the stick itself is still in good condition. When it comes to the Ilarians, we got 1, 2, 3, 4 that still look viable. This one looks a little stressed and it may not make it, but the stick still looks healthy. That stick still looks healthy. Those still look healthy. So good shot at those. And then I have 1 little small ALPENWEISS there that still looks healthy. So, you know, once again, it was cooler this year, and I feel like I maybe could have gotten a few more to root if it had been a slight bit warmer. But overall, I'm still happy with what I have here, and I think I'm going to get some good trees out of this box. Once again, you make sure that you mist this a couple times a day. Keep it out of direct sunlight. Do make sure that if you're not yet subscribed, that if you want to see updates on how these air layers hopefully successfully root, in roughly 8 weeks I'm going to be putting up an update video, and I'll hopefully be potting those up with successful roots then. But if you're subscribed, then you will be able to see when that video gets put up. So make sure that you do that if you want the updates. Also, if you did enjoy this video, please consider clicking that like button as well. And until next time, thanks for watching.